Happy Labor Day to you guys. It's September 6th, 2010. This is the first syndication of Darwin Speaks. I'm going to talk college football today, talk about the past weekend of college football. I'll discuss the top 25 and possibly some teams that may have an impact on the top 25 later on in the year, or some teams that I just don't look at as doing so well this year. Let's start with number one, Alabama and San Jose State. Alabama wins that game 41-3. Number two, Ohio State versus Marshall. Ohio State wins that game 45-7. Boise State and Vatech plays later on tonight. Looking at that to be a pretty challenging game. I don't know if Boise State can really compete with a team with such a strong running attack like Vatech. But then again, anytime Boise State has time to prepare for a game, they come out playing very well. So all in all, I look at Boise State winning that game, and there's more issues than just them being well prepared. Vatech normally does not play good against top five teams, or even top 10 teams of that matter. So I'm looking at Boise State to win that game by touchdown to 10 points. Florida State, I'm sorry, the University of Florida versus Miami of Ohio, 34-12. Miami just, as far as I'm concerned, didn't look good at all in that game. Too many miscues, and which is something that's very, very suspect of Urban Meyer. I mean, I just can't understand how his team could come into that game so unprepared to play. But maybe it was nerves, or maybe they were just unprepared. Not sure, but they just didn't look good at all. Number five, Texas against Rice. Texas also was very disappointing to me. A very disappointing showing. Although they won big, 34-12. uh, I'm sorry, 34-17. It just didn't look like a team that's going to be able to actually compete for a national championship this year, unless they get some things turned around. Best game of the weekend I thought was TCU against Oregon State. TCU winning that game 30-21, which was a very good showing by TCU, but I expected them to show up. And Oregon State is one of them teams that you just can never look past. I mean, very competitive. They play hard. They're well coached. Number seven, Oklahoma against Utah State. Oklahoma wins that game 31-24, which was a pathetic showing by Oklahoma. Uh, they just don't look like a team that's going to be able to stop anyone. And it's been there, as far as I'm concerned, their Achilles heel outside of injuries and all that, and a young offensive line coming in of the last couple of seasons. I think the offense will be okay in time, but the defense just gives up too many big plays, over pursuit, not discipline. It's been, to me, their Achilles heel the past, oh gosh, probably 8 years or so. I mean, within the past 8 years, they've had good quarterbacks, a good offensive scheme, and all that, that they could run up points on teams and all that. But their defense was always, as far as I'm concerned, their problem. Like I said, they're not disciplined, and they just too aggressive. And it's just not a good mixture. You'll always give up good plays when you're acting very aggressive defensively, but you're not disciplined. And I look at them as being hurt by a lot of teams, and I think a lot of teams have figured that out about Oklahoma. Number eight, Nebraska and Western Kentucky. Nebraska wins that game 49-10. They put a decent showing out, but I'll say this for the record: out of all the teams in the NCAA, Nebraska's probably the team I probably hate the most. But that's another story. Number nine, Iowa versus Eastern Illinois. Iowa wins that game 37-7. Uh, Iowa should be all right, but Iowa's year after year, they're always you just can't figure them out. I just can't understand why they just can't get over that hump. And they're pretty well coached. They have some issues now and then at quarterback with injuries and things of that matter, but they tend to, how would I put it? I don't know. It's like they just don't know themselves, especially later on, late in the season. I don't know if that's coaching, or I don't know if that's the players that they acquire. But I look at Iowa's doing all right this year in the Big Ten. Number 10, Virginia Tech, Boise State. We talked about that earlier. They play later on tonight. Number 11, Oregon, 72 New Mexico 0. They were probably the most impressive team over the weekend, as far as I'm concerned. They offensively just looked unbelievable. Very quick, very athletic. But it's New Mexico State. But anytime a team runs up 72 points, especially the way they did it, they look at them as being a threat. And they start the season at number 11. It's very difficult for them to get to the national championship game, especially if the teams ahead of them don't lose. But I don't know. Maybe they get some style points along the way and do well. Number 12, Wisconsin, 41-21 winners over UNLV. Wisconsin coming from a season where they actually played very well in the Big Ten, led in total offense, and they're just a downhill team as far as their running attack is concerned. So I'm looking at them as doing well in the Big Ten this year. Number 13, Miami of Florida over FAM. Florida A&M. Miami won that game 45-0. USC over Hawaii 49-36. That's a lot of points for a USC team to be giving up to a team like Hawaii. 39 points would leave me with some major concerns for USC this year. So those people that are fans of USC this year, I don't look at them as having that productive of a year when they're giving up 39 points to Hawaii, unless Hawaii is a lot better than they're getting credit for. Number 15, Pitt loses to Utah in overtime, 27-24. Which is a surprise, and then again, it's not a surprise. Utah is normally a very well coached team. They play hard. Pitt, I'm really surprised that Pitt actually, I'm just surprised they lost that game, although Utah, like I said, is a pretty good team, and they're coached very well. Georgia Tech over South Carolina State, 41-10. Arkansas beat up on Tennessee Tech 44-3. North Carolina loses to LSU. And they were shorthanded. If I recall, North Carolina did not bring 8 of their defensive players because of some type of investigation. And LSU just got over in that game. So I don't look at LSU as having a strong year playing in the SEC, which is, like everyone knows, is a very tough conference. And for you to just get over a team that's missing 8 of the defensive starters, I just don't see you being that productive in a conference that's dominated by defense. So moving right along, number 19, Penn State, like every year, wins over Youngstown State, 44-14. Penn State plays at Alabama next week, and as far as looking at Alabama and looking at Penn State this week, Penn State's going to have their hands full. They have a young quarterback. He played decent at home, but it's a big difference when you're playing on the road in a place like Tuscaloosa. So I'm looking at Alabama to win that game by at least 14 points. But that's next week, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Number 20, FSU. Florida State winning over Samford 59-6. Now, I'm a big Florida State fan. They got rid of Bobby Bowden, which I figured should have happened a few years ago. I was suspect about Jimbo Fisher because, as far as I was concerned, their offense was the Achilles heel of their entire game plan and their success. And they hired the offensive coordinator to be the head coach. So I was a little suspect about that, but when I watched them this weekend play, I was very impressed by their offensive production. So who knows? Florida State might be back. I mean, they look good enough to cause some problems for some teams this year. Next week, they're at Oklahoma, if I'm not mistaken. I'm looking for them to really dominate Oklahoma. Like I said, Oklahoma is defensively not there. They give up too many big plays, and they're too aggressive. Very well at stopping the run, but when you got a quarterback like Christian Ponder and an offensive attack like the one I've seen this weekend with Florida State, and who knows, it's Samford. So, don't play too much into that, I guess, especially if you're laying bets. But, yes, I'm looking at Florida State to succeed against Oklahoma. Number 21, we've talked about LSU already. We've talked about LSU against I'm sorry, North Carolina. Like I said, LSU, I don't look at them as having that successful of a year. Number 21, Auburn over Arkansas State, 52-26. Georgia over uh, Louisiana Lafayette, 55-7. Oregon State, we talked about against TCU. And West Virginia, 31 over Coastal Carolina, 31-0. Now, some teams I want to talk about that could have some major impacts on the top 25 this year. South Carolina, coming out of the SEC. They played very well against Southern Miss. They won 41-13. Michigan looked very well against a team that's very well coached. They won 31-10 over UConn. Um, I don't know if it's the same UConn team or they're playing with the same passion as they played with last year, but all in all, Michigan just looked very, very good. Oklahoma State running away with Washington State, 65-17. Washington State is a pathetic team at best. Oklahoma State putting up 65 points, which is very impressive. And like I tell people over and over and over, they always talk about, these teams beating up on weaker teams. But when your offense can show that it's that coordinated to put up that many points, I mean, let's look at some of the scores over the weekend. You had some teams that were, I guess, Division II caliber playing against Division I schools. Like the next team I want to talk about that I'm, uh, how can I say, in simple terms or in kind terms, disgusted with, and that's Kansas. They're losing to North Dakota State 6-3. Now, I've said earlier how my dislike for the University of Nebraska, but the University of Kansas is being coached by a former Husker, Turner Gill. Have a lot of respect for Turner Gill. He seems to be a very stand-up type of guy. But him losing his opener, his coaching debut at the University of Kansas to a team like North Dakota State is just unacceptable, especially when your offense only scores 3 points. It's really pathetic. But that concludes the show for this week. You can join me on Friday. I'll have a show discussing the weekend coming up in college football. And if you have any questions or comments, you can email me at darwinspeaks@yahoo.com, and I'll get to some of your questions, some of your comments. At all costs, have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining me.